Can you imagine being convicted before you're allowed to speak? Those were the first words my sister used to end my place in that house. Not out loud. Not yet. She did it with a zipper and a stack of cash. It was 2010, West Des Moines, Iowa. I was 14. I came home from Roosevelt Middle School with rain still clinging to my jacket sleeves. Cold October rain, the kind that seeps through denim and turns your socks into something heavy and useless. My backpack hung off one shoulder, pulling slightly to the left, stuffed with algebra homework and a damp paperback I'd borrowed from the library. The living room lights were on. That alone was wrong. My father and mother were sitting side by side on the couch, knees aligned, hands folded like they were waiting for news from a doctor. My sister Rachel stood a step behind them, 18, arms crossed, calm, prepared. No one said hello. A week earlier, my father had mentioned, almost casually, that he wanted to go over the family accounts that weekend. Credit cards, checkbooks, everything. He said it while rinsing a coffee mug, staring into the sink, like it was just another chore. I hadn't thought about it again. Rachel had. She took one step forward and said my name the way teachers do before reading a bad grade aloud. Then she said it. She's been taking money. My backpack was still on my shoulder. I hadn't even taken my shoes off. Rachel reached for the strap and slid the bag off me with a practiced motion, like she'd rehearsed it. She placed it on the wooden coffee table, centered it carefully, and pulled the zipper open. The sound was loud in the quiet room. She tipped the bag slightly. Cash slid out. Bills folded once, edges aligned. $420. It landed exactly where she wanted it to. My mother covered her mouth. My father leaned forward. He didn't touch the money. He just stared at it, then lifted his eyes to my face like he was matching it to a photograph. I found it in her bag, Rachel said. I didn't want to believe it at first. Her voice was steady, concerned, almost tired. She went on. She said she'd noticed money missing from Mom's checkbook. Small amounts, over time. She said she'd checked my room. She said she was scared for me. I looked at the cash on the table, then at my backpack. The math didn't make sense. I hadn't opened my bag since last period. I hadn't seen that money before. I opened my mouth. My father raised his hand, not in anger, in finality. He looked at the bills one more time before he looked at me again. His eyes didn't ask a question. They confirmed a decision already made. Thomas Coleman, 46 years old, head of household, keeper of order. Why would you do this? He asked. It wasn't an invitation to answer. It was a closing argument. Rachel shifted slightly, just enough for me to see her face from a different angle. Her mouth stayed neutral. Her eyes didn't. That was when I understood. This wasn't a conversation. It was a presentation. Rachel had known about the account review. She'd known the timing. She'd known where to place the money so it would fall just right when the bag opened. She'd known that once the cash was visible, no explanation would survive long enough to matter. I stood there with wet sneakers leaving small dark marks on the carpet. No one asked where the money came from. No one checked the checkbook. No one asked why a 14-year-old would keep stolen cash in plain sight inside a school bag. My father nodded once, slowly, like a judge acknowledging a verdict. I realized then that the trial had already happened. I just hadn't been invited to it. Rachel didn't improvise that moment in the living room. It had been rehearsed. While I was still sitting in fifth period at Roosevelt, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, my chemistry worksheet half filled with penciled equations, Rachel was standing at an ATM 3 miles away. It was 2:12 p.m. The receipt printed cleanly. $420. One transaction. She used my father's card. She knew his PIN because she handled the household bills. She balanced the checkbook. She paid the utilities. She'd been doing it since Mom started trusting her with grown-up responsibilities. That trust was a convenience. Rachel used it like a master key. She didn't withdraw the money in the morning, too early, bank staff around. She didn't wait until evening, too many questions. She chose the window just before school let out, that narrow slice of time when the house would still be empty, when my father would be at work, when no one would think to check anything yet. Cameras existed, of course, but cameras only matter when someone looks at them. Rachel understood that systems don't fail all at once. They fail slowly, through assumption. This wasn't the first time. The withdrawals had been happening for months. $50 here, $80 there. Never enough to trigger an alert. Never enough to make the balance feel wrong in a way you could point to. The numbers drifted, just slightly, like a compass nudged off true north. Enough to confuse, not enough to alarm. The $420 wasn't about money. It was about timing. After the ATM, Rachel drove straight to Casey's gas station off Ashworth Road. She paid $29.99 in cash for a prepaid phone. No rewards card, no receipt kept. She didn't look rushed, according to the clerk who would later try to remember her face. She didn't need to. The plan had already been written. She activated the phone in her car, sent a handful of messages to herself, short ones, sloppy enough to look real. A threat, a demand. She took screenshots. Then she powered the phone down, popped the SIM, and dropped it into a trash can near the air pump before driving home. By the time I walked through the front door, wet from the rain, everything was already in place. Rachel stood close to my father as she spoke. Not touching him, just close enough that her shoulder almost brushed his arm. Her voice shook, but only slightly. The kind of tremor people associate with concern, not fear. She kept her eyes on him while she talked, not on me. That mattered. "I didn't want to believe it," she said again, "but I was worried." My father listened the way people listen when they want to be reassured that they're right to be angry. In the kitchen, my mother didn't move. Linda Coleman, 44 years old. She held the checkbook in both hands like it weighed more than paper. Her thumb rested on the edge, right where the carbon copies stuck together. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Rachel either. She stared at the counter, at a spot just above the sink where the laminate had begun to peel. She said nothing. When I stepped fully into the room, the air felt different, dense, arranged. The money on the table wasn't evidence waiting to be examined. It was a prop already accepted as truth. Whatever I might have said about the timing, the math, the impossibility of it, no longer had a place to land. The story had already been told. I was just arriving late to hear it. My father stood up first. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace. He spoke the way people do when they believe they're being reasonable. "You're not safe for this family anymore." The words landed cleanly. No qualifiers, no room for appeal. Rachel stayed where she was, eyes on the floor now, like she'd already done her part and didn't need to watch the rest. My mother remained in the kitchen, still holding the checkbook. It hadn't moved. My father crossed the room and picked up my backpack from the coffee table. He didn't look inside it again. He didn't need to. He carried it to the front door and opened it with one sharp pull. Cold air rushed in. Rain followed. He stepped onto the porch and threw the bag outward. Not hard, not gentle, just enough. It hit the concrete and split on impact. The zipper gave. Books slid out. Loose papers scattered. Algebra homework soaked through almost immediately, ink bleeding into the page like a slow bruise. I took a step forward. "I didn't—" Rachel turned her head. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't glare. She simply looked away, toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms, as if something there suddenly required her attention. The effect was precise. I wasn't being argued with. I was being dismissed. The porch light clicked on. bright, white, direct. It washed the front step in a flat glow that erased shadows and made everything feel exposed. Rain streaked through the light in straight lines, the kind you can't avoid even when you try to stand still. My father gestured once, toward the open door. Go. I didn't grab a coat. I didn't reach for my phone on the side table. I didn't ask for money. None of those things were offered. The rules had already shifted. I understood that instinctively. I stepped onto the porch in my sneakers. The cold came up through the soles immediately. Water pooled near the edge where the concrete sloped downward. Behind me, the door closed. Not slammed, closed. Then the deadbolt turned from the inside. Slow, deliberate. One click, then another. The sound carried. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, looking at the door like it might open again if I waited. It didn't. The light above me stayed on. The rain didn't change. I picked up my backpack and pulled it onto my shoulder. One strap had torn loose. It hung unevenly, shifting the weight wrong. I didn't try to fix it. When I stepped off the porch, the street came into view. The cul-de-sac curved gently, empty at that hour. Lawns dark and slick, driveways shining under the rain. No cars, no movement. I walked to the center of the circle and stopped. From there, I could see every house, every window. None of them looked back. That was when it registered. There hadn't been shouting. There hadn't been a final accusation. No dramatic line to mark the moment. Just a door closing and a lock turning. And that was enough. I wasn't grounded. I wasn't punished. I had been removed. The house behind me stood quiet and intact, lights still on inside, the evening continuing without interruption. I stood in the rain and understood that whatever name I'd had in that family had just been crossed out. Route 22 stretched out ahead of me, dark and reflective, the yellow lines broken into pieces by the rain. I walked along the shoulder with my head down, counting steps without realizing I was doing it. My sneakers were canvas. They absorbed water quickly. Within minutes, each step made a soft, hollow sound. The fabric clung. My socks stopped insulating anything. After the first mile, my feet went numb. Not painful, just distant, like they belonged to someone else and I was borrowing them. Cars passed without slowing. Headlights flared white, then red, then vanished. Tires cut through standing water and sent cold sheets up my legs. No one looked twice. I was just another shape on the roadside, hoodless, moving in the wrong direction for that time of night. I didn't wave. I didn't try to flag anyone down. I kept walking. When I reached the high V on the corner, the parking lot was empty. The automatic doors were dark. Hours posted on the glass. Closed. I stepped under the shallow awning and leaned against the brick. The overhang blocked some of the rain, but not the cold. Water dripped steadily from the edge, tapping the concrete near my feet in a slow, patient rhythm. My hands were shaking now. Not violently. Enough to notice. I tried to flex my fingers. They responded late. Across the street, a row of houses sat back from the road, lights glowing behind curtains. I watched one window for a long time, thought about walking over, about knocking, about explaining something I didn't have language for yet. I pictured the door opening, a stranger's face, questions I wouldn't know how to answer. Where are your parents? Why are you out here? What did you do? I stayed where I was. A week earlier, we'd had Sunday dinner at the same table we always used. Roast chicken, potatoes. Rachel had complained about a class. My father had nodded through the meal, distracted but present. My chair had been pulled out for me without comment. My glass had been refilled when it was empty. That felt like a long time ago. The rain wasn't heavy. It didn't need to be. It was steady, unbroken. Enough to soak everything given enough time. My jacket clung to my back. The backpack strap dug into my shoulder where it had torn. I shifted it, then stopped bothering. I sat down on the concrete under the awning. The cold pressed in once I stopped moving. It came from the ground first, then my legs, then my arms. I pulled my knees up and wrapped my arms around them, resting my forehead against the fabric of my jacket. The smell of damp asphalt and grocery store concrete filled my nose. I thought about closing my eyes. The idea felt dangerous. I remembered something from health class, not the exact words, just the warning that sleep wasn't always rest, that sometimes it meant your body giving up because it didn't have enough left to keep you awake. I stayed sitting. I didn't lie down. Every few minutes I shifted my weight, just to prove to myself that I could still move. My thoughts slowed, not in a dramatic way. They stretched out, longer between each one. The awning light flickered once, then steadied. I stayed there, under fluorescent glare and dripping rain, counting breaths and waiting for something to change, knowing that if no one saw me, the night would still keep going. The police found me at 4:30 in the morning. I was near an abandoned bus stop a few blocks east of the Hy-Vee, the kind with a cracked bench and a faded route map that hadn't been updated in years. I wasn't asleep. I was sitting upright, arms folded, backpack at my feet. My shoes were still wet. My hands had stopped shaking. The patrol car slowed before it stopped. Headlights washed over the concrete and held. A door opened, then another. Officer Daniel Wright, 52 years old. That's what his badge said. He knelt so we were at eye level and asked my name. His voice was calm, practiced. Not kind, not unkind, just steady. He didn't ask why I was there first. He asked how old I was. When I told him, he nodded once and radioed it in. Juvenile, no guardian present. Weather exposure, procedure. He wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and guided me into the back seat. The heater was on. The air smelled like vinyl and old coffee. I didn't lean back. I sat straight, hands folded in my lap, watching condensation form and clear on the window with each breath. At the station, they took my information. Name, age, address, or what used to be one. Officer Wright made the call himself. I could hear his side of it from the desk across the room. He explained the situation clearly. A minor found alone overnight. No coat, no phone, no transportation. He said where I'd been found and what time. He asked if they could come pick me up. There was a pause. Then my father's voice came through the receiver, loud enough to carry. If she did that, he said, then she's not my daughter anymore. Officer Wright didn't argue. He didn't raise his eyebrows. He wrote something down. Understood, he said. We'll note that. The call ended. No one called my mother after that. Child Protective Services was notified at 4:47 a.m. The intake worker arrived just after 5. She introduced herself, flipped open a folder, and began filling out forms. Child abandonment. That was the category. Not lost, not runaway, abandonment. The words sat on the page without decoration. I was placed in the waiting area. A row of molded plastic chairs bolted to the floor. Pale blue. One of them had a crack along the back. I chose the one at the end. A vending machine hummed against the wall, lights blinking in a slow, uneven pattern. Every few minutes, it made a mechanical clunk, like it was reminding itself to keep going. No one asked if I was cold. No one offered food. No one asked if I needed anything. They didn't need to. The system had a rhythm. It moved forward whether I did or not. Officer Wright passed by once and set a paper cup of water on the chair beside me. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The sun came up somewhere behind the building. I could tell by the way the light shifted through the frosted glass near the ceiling. Morning without ceremony. I sat there listening to the vending machine and the distant sound of phones ringing, understanding that my absence had been acknowledged, logged, and accepted. No one was coming, and that too was being handled according to procedure. Evelyn Moore arrived just after 8. She was 63, according to the intake sheet clipped to her folder. Gray hair pulled back neatly. Sensible shoes. No jewelry except a watch with a scratched face. She introduced herself, sat across from me at the small table in the interview room, and placed a recorder between us. She didn't ask permission to turn it on. She didn't need to. She started with times. What hour did I leave school? Which entrance? Who saw me last? She moved to places next. Route numbers, store names, distances. She wrote as I spoke, pausing only to underline something when a detail matched another. She didn't say she believed me. She didn't say she didn't. When I told her about the ATM, I gave her the time the way it had stuck in my head, 2:12 p.m. When I told her about the phone, I told her the price I'd overheard Rachel mention weeks earlier when she joked about cheap burners. $29.99, cash, Casey's gas station. I didn't dress it up. I didn't connect the dots for her. I just laid the pieces on the table. Evelyn asked how I knew about the missing money. I told her about the small amounts, how the numbers didn't vanish all at once, how they thinned, how no one noticed until there was a reason to notice. She nodded once and wrote something down. She stepped out for 10 minutes and returned with a printout from the school district. Attendance records. Roosevelt Middle School, October. My name highlighted in pale yellow. Present through last period. Bell schedule attached. She compared it to the withdrawal time. The overlap was clean. She didn't smile. She didn't lean back. She tapped the edge of the paper twice with her pen, as if confirming the weight of it. This, she said, doesn't prove anything by itself. She let the sentence finish before continuing. But it does tell me something doesn't line up. That was all. She explained the next steps without drama. More verification. Requests for records. Conversations she would have to document carefully. She said investigations weren't sprints. They were sequences. And sequences took time. She closed the folder. You're not going back to your parents' house, she said. Not today. There was no emphasis on the word parents, just the statement of fact. She asked if I had any relatives nearby. I gave her my grandmother's name and address. Margaret Cole, 70 years old, lived 20 minutes away. She wrote it down, then made another call. The ride to my grandmother's house was quiet. The car smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. I watched neighborhoods pass, lawns clipped short, mailboxes straightened, ordinary houses doing ordinary things without me. Margaret answered the door in slippers and a cardigan. She didn't ask questions on the porch. She stepped aside and let me in. The heat inside hit my face first, then the smell of coffee. Evelyn explained the arrangement in careful terms. Temporary placement, pending review. Margaret listened without interrupting, hands folded in front of her. When Evelyn left, my grandmother handed me a mug and pointed toward the couch. You can sit, she said. You're safe here. I sat. No one promised me anything beyond that, and for the first time since the night before, that was enough to hold. I grew up at my grandmother's house in Cedar Rapids. Not immediately, not cleanly, but completely. After the paperwork settled into its drawers and the calls stopped coming, the past went quiet. My grandmother didn't forbid contact with my parents. She didn't need to. There were no calls to answer, no cards in the mail, no holidays negotiated across kitchen tables. The separation didn't feel dramatic. It felt administrative. I enrolled in a new school, different hallways, different teachers. My last name still the same, but spoken by people who didn't attach it to anything. I learned where the buses stopped, which lockers jammed, how long it took to walk home in the snow without thinking about where I was going. Life filled the space it was given. Rachel finished college. I knew because my grandmother clipped a notice from the local paper and folded it once before placing it in a drawer she rarely opened. Business degree. Honors. internship at a regional bank. Her name appeared in the way respectable names do, clean typeface, no qualifiers. She was still the good daughter. I worked. I studied. I moved forward. The CPS file stayed where it had been placed, a manila folder inside a metal cabinet in a county office, tab facing outward, untouched. The system had done what it was designed to do: intervene once, then step back. Years passed without incident. Then the call came. I was 29 and sitting at my desk when my phone rang. Unknown number, area code I didn't recognize. I let it ring twice before answering. "Is this?" He said my name carefully, checking pronunciation. "This is Mark Jensen." He told me his age without meaning to. 57. Lawyers tend to do that, anchoring credibility in numbers. He said he was calling because my name had surfaced during an internal audit. He didn't say whose audit at first. He asked if I remembered an incident from 2010 involving an ATM withdrawal and an allegation of theft. I said yes. There was a pause. Not long, just enough. "Rachel Coleman," he said. "Your sister. She's under investigation." He didn't use the word accused. He used reviewed, examined, irregularities. He said she'd worked her way up. Junior analyst, senior associate, trusted. The pattern was familiar. Small discrepancies, adjustments that smoothed over balances rather than breaking them. Numbers that made sense until someone asked why they did. He said the internal team noticed it late, that banks rarely look backward unless something forces them to. "What forced it?" I asked. "A whistleblower," he said. "Someone junior. Knew enough not to know which questions weren't supposed to be asked." He explained the findings without emotion. Repeated withdrawals just under reporting thresholds. Client accounts moved through intermediary ledgers. Timing windows that avoided overlap with supervisory reviews. "It's not large enough yet to be criminal," he said. "But the structure—" He stopped himself, then continued. "The structure is consistent." Consistent with what? He didn't say my case. He didn't need to. He asked if I still lived in Iowa, if I would be willing to answer some questions, if I had any records from that time, anything that might help establish a pattern. After the call ended, I sat still for a long moment. The office around me kept working. Phones rang, printers hummed, someone laughed near the break room. I thought about the filing cabinet, about the manila folder, about how truth doesn't disappear when it isn't used. It waits. I also thought about weight, about how much evidence has to exist before it changes anything, before it stops being suspicion and starts being consequence. I wasn't sure yet if what I carried would be enough, and that uncertainty settled in quietly, heavier than it should have been. Mark didn't rush after that first call. He waited 3 weeks before contacting me again. Long enough for the internal team to finish what they needed to finish. Long enough for the questions to stop being hypothetical. When he called the second time, his voice sounded different, more deliberate. "We pulled archival footage," he said, "from 2010. He didn't specify at first. He let me fill in the blank. ATM cameras keep more than people think. Not the footage itself, always, but the logs, the references, the ability to request retrieval when there's cause. Mark had filed the request through the bank's compliance department, not as a favor, as a necessity. The images were grainy. The resolution was what it was back then, but the timestamp was sharp. October, 2:12 p.m. Rachel stood in frame with her hair pulled back, one hand steadying the machine while the other keyed in numbers she knew by heart. She didn't look around. She didn't hesitate. The receipt printed, she took it, folded it once, put it in her pocket. At that exact minute, I was still in class. Mark cross-referenced the footage with school attendance records. Roosevelt Middle School. Bell schedule archived digitally. My name marked present through dismissal. a chemistry teacher's notes still stored in the system because no one had bothered to purge them. The overlap was precise, no gaps, no assumptions. Then came the bank records, months of small withdrawals, not all on the same day of the week, not all from the same machine, just enough variation to look like coincidence, just enough restraint to avoid attention. The amounts never crossed thresholds that would trigger review. The timing always avoided overlap with my father's deposits. It wasn't clever. It was practiced. Mark laid everything out during a video call. He didn't use a screen share at first. He spoke instead, slowly, carefully, like he wanted the words to arrive intact. "She's been doing this a long time," he said. Not, "she did this." "She's been doing this." The distinction mattered. He explained that patterns don't lie, that fraud rarely begins with a single event. It escalates as confidence grows, as systems remain silent, as people stop looking. Rachel had learned early that authority doesn't question what feels familiar. She'd learned how to stay just inside the margins, how to let other people do the assuming. The past didn't resist the explanation anymore. It accepted it. There was no alternative theory that fit the data, no version of events where I had been involved, no possibility left to argue intent or misunderstanding. The story we'd lived with collapsed under its own weight. Mark asked if I wanted to pursue anything further. Civil claims, statements, restitution tied to prior incidents. He said the option existed now that the pattern was established. I told him I needed time. After the call, I opened my laptop and stared at a blank screen longer than necessary. I wasn't surprised. Not really. Confirmation doesn't shock when you've been carrying its outline for years. What changed wasn't my understanding. It was everyone else's. Rachel's position at the bank was suspended pending review. Access revoked. Credentials frozen. The same system she'd relied on closed around her quietly. No announcements, no raised voices, just doors that no longer opened. My parents weren't mentioned in the report. They didn't need to be. Their authority had already done its work back then. It didn't survive scrutiny. What fell wasn't just a lie. It was the structure that had allowed it to stand. The power my family once held, the certainty, the narrative control, the ability to define truth by volume, dissolved without ceremony. No apology followed. No explanation arrived. There was nothing left to say. For the first time, the record told the story without me in the room. And that, more than anything, felt final. Rachel lost her job quietly. There was no announcement, no escort out of the building. Her access stopped working one morning, and by the afternoon, her profile no longer appeared in the internal directory. Compliance flagged her file. Human Resources added a notation that wouldn't expire. In finance, that kind of mark doesn't need explanation. It moves ahead of you into every future interview. Word traveled faster outside the bank. The church stopped calling. The shared meals ended without discussion. Names were crossed off volunteer lists. Invitations didn't arrive, then stopped being expected. Communities that prize order tend to withdraw approval the same way they give it, silently and all at once. Rachel didn't reach out. My parents did. They found my number through my grandmother, called once, then again, left a voicemail that stayed careful, measured, like they were afraid of saying the wrong thing and closing a door they weren't sure still existed. I agreed to meet them at a cafe near the river. Neutral ground, public, easy to leave. My father arrived first. He looked smaller than I remembered, older. His posture had softened, shoulders rounding forward like he'd been leaning into apologies for a while. My mother followed a minute later, eyes scanning the room before settling on me. We sat. No one touched their coffee. My father spoke slowly. He said he hadn't checked the accounts because he trusted Rachel. He said she'd always handled the numbers, always been responsible. He said he'd assumed consistency meant correctness. He didn't say my name when he said this. My mother spoke next. She admitted she'd noticed the balances didn't always line up, that the numbers drifted, that she'd told herself it was timing, or her own misunderstanding. She said she didn't want to be the one to question it. She didn't want to start something she didn't know how to finish. They didn't argue. They didn't ask me to come back. They didn't ask for contact. They asked for forgiveness in the way people do when they understand it might not arrive. I listened. I noticed details instead. The way my father folded and unfolded the paper napkin without realizing it. The way my mother's ring clicked softly against the mug when she shifted her hand. The sound of the espresso machine behind the counter, steady and indifferent. When they finished, there was nothing left to add. I didn't tell them what it had been like. I didn't recount the night on Route 22 or the plastic chairs at the station. They hadn't asked. And even if they had, I wasn't interested in translating consequences into language. I stood up. They didn't stop me. Outside, the river moved the way it always does, forward, unconcerned with explanations. I walked toward my car without looking back, not out of anger, but because the conversation had already ended where it needed to. I didn't promise anything. Some things, once taken, don't come back when the truth finally arrives. They stay where they were lost. After that meeting, nothing dramatic happened. No phone calls followed. No letters arrived. The silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space being returned to its rightful owner. I understood then that boundaries aren't lines you draw to hurt someone. They're structures you build so you don't collapse trying to hold everyone else upright. They aren't loud. They don't announce themselves. They hold, or they don't. I still care. That part never turns off completely. But caring doesn't require proximity, and it doesn't require permission to be harmed. For a long time, I thought distance meant something was unresolved, that forgiveness needed a response, that closure came with agreement. I know better now. Closure is what happens when you stop waiting for someone else to confirm what you already lived through. I don't need my old family to validate my worth. That work is finished. It was finished the night a locked door turned and no one came back for me. Everything after that was reinforcement. The truth arrived late. It took years. It took audits and records and someone finally asking the right questions. But it arrived where it belonged. Not as an apology, as a fact. Some Sundays now, I cook dinner with my grandmother. The table is smaller, the room is quieter. There's no seating chart to manage, no tension disguised as conversation. We eat what we like. We take our time. Sometimes we don't talk much at all. Those are my favorite evenings. The house settles early. The dishes dry on the rack. The windows reflect the lights inside. There's no expectation of a knock. No need to rehearse explanations. I sit with that quiet and let it stay. For years, silence meant something was wrong, that it needed to be filled, corrected, explained. Now it means the opposite. It means nothing is pressing in. Nothing is waiting to be defended. I think about the version of myself who stood in the middle of that cul-de-sac, rain in her shoes, trying to understand what had just been taken. I don't reach back with anger or pity. I don't need to. She made it here. Justice didn't give me back what I lost. It couldn't. It gave me something else instead. A life that doesn't ask me to prove I deserve to stay. Some evenings are very quiet. After everything, that quiet is enough.